One signal never made a sound, but the dog heard it. The river was frozen, the wind sharp like glass. Snow drifted through the streetlights, wrapping the city in a hush no one dared disturb. On a bridge no longer traveled, a retired K-9 named Rex sat beside his handler, a broken man named Ethan who had come here for silence, but not to listen. He was ready to leave this world. But Rex wasn't. Somewhere below them, behind fogged glass and flickering diner lights, a child too young to scream was whispering for help, with her hands. No one saw her, no one heard her, but Rex did. And what he refused to walk away from would lead Ethan back from the edge, to a forgotten girl, to a buried promise, to the one mission that still mattered, off the battlefield. This isn't a rescue story. It's the story of a soldier, a child, and a dog who still believed in duty. Before we begin, look into the storm one more time, because that's where he heard her. The city had closed in on itself under a thick, leaden sky. Snow blew sideways in bitter gusts, pinwheeling past shuttered windows and telephone lines. It was the kind of winter that didn't fall softly, but crashed like waves, fierce, relentless, erasing roads and names. At the far end of the main street, a dimly lit diner flickered against the storm. Through the fogged glass, the world inside seemed warm, ordinary. A family laughed over soup. A man read a paper. But in the farthest booth, almost unseen, a little girl sat rigid, her pink dress wrinkled, her cheeks smudged. She said nothing. She barely moved. Across from her, a man in a black suit watched her in silence, his face expressionless, his eyes still. No one else seemed to notice, but something in the air did. Ethan Miller had stopped noticing the world a long time ago. He stood on a bridge just past the edge of town, where the road curved into the forest and the river froze into stillness. The snow had covered the railings in white foam, and his boots sank half an inch into packed ice. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the cold steel, looking down at the black glass below. He had no plan for what came next. No ceremony. Just the kind of quiet you long for when noise has lived in your head too long. At 45, Ethan looked older than his years. War had a way of measuring time differently. He was tall, though his shoulders had begun to stoop from old injuries and older memories. His hair was cropped short, streaked at the temples with early gray, and a few days' stubble shaded his square jaw. He wore a heavy army green jacket, not uniform, but something close, the kind of coat that carried memory in every crease. His face was unreadable, not calm, just empty. Beside him sat Rex, the last remnant of the life Ethan used to belong to. The German shepherd, now 8, bore the posture of a soldier at rest, but never off duty. His coat was thick, dark along the back, with silver softening his muzzle. The dog watched Ethan the way one watches a slow-moving storm. Quiet, steady, not yet intervening, but ready. A breeze cut through the valley and made Ethan wince. He reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against metal. Dog tags, not his. Mike Dawson had always been the loud one, the brave one. The kind of guy who cracked jokes under fire and sang off-key through desert nights. He was 2 years younger, broader in the chest, faster on his feet. But Ethan had always been the one they called the calm. It was Mike who adopted Rex first, called him Sergeant Rex, like the dog had rank. They were inseparable, those two, until the roadside blast took one of them. Ethan didn't remember the sound, just the flash, and the shove. He hadn't wanted to take Rex afterward. At first, he couldn't even look at the dog without seeing Mike's grin. But Rex wouldn't leave his side, not in the hospital, not at the funeral. The damn dog just sat there, tail still, eyes steady, like he was waiting for orders from someone who wasn't coming back. They sent Rex home with Ethan. And in the silence that followed war, it was Rex who kept breathing beside him. It was Rex who stood in the doorway each time Ethan woke up gasping. It was Rex who found him on the bathroom floor after the whiskey and the pills. Always there, always watching. Ethan shifted his grip on the railing. The wind screamed through the steel beams below. Maybe this was the right place. Mike had always said he liked rivers, said they made good goodbyes. Ethan looked down, and for a moment he stopped feeling anything. Then, quietly behind him, Rex whined. Ethan didn't turn. Rex stepped closer. His paw pressed into the packed snow. Another whine, low, insistent. Then the growl came, not loud, not a threat, but a warning. Ethan turned slowly. Rex wasn't looking at him. The dog's eyes were locked on something distant. Through the snow, far down the road, a faint golden light flickered. A building barely visible, half swallowed by the storm. The diner. Rex took a step forward. "Rex!" Ethan said, his voice rough. It was the first word he'd spoken in hours, but the dog didn't stop. He turned back, locked eyes with Ethan, and then walked a few paces toward the light. Then stopped again. Waited. Ethan's hands had gone cold against the railing. His fingers twitched. Rex whined once more, louder now. Then he stepped back and tugged at Ethan's coat with his teeth. Ethan exhaled. He didn't know what the dog had seen. He didn't care. But he knew that sound. That look. It was the same one Rex had given him in Kandahar, 3 seconds before the mortar hit. A kind of cry only someone who's lost everything can still recognize. And somewhere in that golden haze beyond the falling snow, something was waiting. Rex had sensed it first. The bell above the diner door jingled as Ethan stepped inside. Rex pressed close to his leg, their boots and paws shedding snow onto the welcome mat. Warmth met them like a wave. Stale coffee, fried eggs, the soft hum of a jukebox playing something old and slow in the corner. Ethan blinked as his eyes adjusted. He hadn't realized how numb he had gone standing on that bridge. But now, inside the diner's foggy windows and yellow ceiling lights, the contrast felt like stepping from the edge of the world back into someone else's memory. Rex didn't shake off the snow. He moved with low purpose, head just above the ground, his nose twitching. Ethan gave a nod to no one in particular and made his way to a small 2-seater booth in the corner, back to the wall, habit. Rex settled underneath the table, but his body didn't relax. His eyes remained fixed across the room. That's when Ethan saw them again, the little girl and the man in the booth. The girl looked no different from earlier, maybe 5. Her pink dress had seen better days. One strap slipped down her shoulder, her hair unbrushed and knotted in places, dirt smudging her cheeks. She didn't fidget, didn't swing her legs like most kids her age. She just sat there, too still. Across from her, the man remained as silent and stone-faced as before. Mid-50s, tall and pale, with slicked-back silver hair and a jaw clenched so tight it looked carved. He wore a black wool coat over a suit, his leather gloves still on. His name, Ethan would soon learn, was Cole Madden. Cole didn't eat, didn't speak, just watched the girl. Or perhaps watched the room watching her. Rex growled, softly. Ethan felt the vibration through the floor. He reached down, gave the dog a small scratch behind the ears. Easy. But Rex's gaze never wavered. From behind the counter came the low voice of a woman. "Ain't seen a dog that alert since my brother's bloodhound used to chase bootleggers." Ethan looked up. The speaker was Margaret. She looked to be in her late 60s, a lean, wiry woman with sharp eyes and calloused hands. Her silver hair was pulled into a loose bun under a knitted beanie, and she wore a stained apron over a thick flannel shirt. Her voice carried the drawl of someone who had never once left the North. She moved like someone who'd seen too much winter to be impressed by snow or strangers. "Coffee?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Black." She poured without another word, but her eyes flicked toward Rex, then to the child in the corner booth. Her expression tightened. "He yours?" she asked, glancing back at the dog. Ethan hesitated. "Sort of. We served together. K9 unit." Margaret let out a sound that was half huff, half respect. "Explains the discipline, but he looks wired, not relaxed. He's got good instincts." Margaret said nothing more, but her gaze lingered on the girl. Ethan turned back to his coffee, just in time to catch it, a motion. Small, quiet. The girl had raised her right hand, her eyes unfocused, not looking at anyone in particular. Her fist closed, opened, closed again, 3 times. Ethan's heart skipped. It was subtle, innocuous. Could have been a child fidgeting, but it wasn't. Not to someone who knew. Not to someone who'd seen it scratched in the dirt outside an ambush site. Not to someone who'd used it once to tell a drone team when to strike. Fist, open, fist, 3 times. SOS. Rex let out another growl, just a breath louder, his ears pricked up. Ethan looked down, his gut clenching. The girl, Lily, though he didn't know her name yet, was still. Completely still. Across from her, Cole turned the page of his book with mechanical calm. Ethan stood up slowly and approached the counter. Margaret was pouring coffee for another customer, a trucker in his 40s, balding, with a worn brown parka and sunken eyes. He gave Ethan a polite nod, then went back to his plate of eggs. Ethan leaned in slightly toward Margaret. "That girl, you know her?" Margaret's hands paused mid-pour. "She came in with that man maybe an hour ago, ordered her pancakes, hasn't said a word." "Have you seen them here before?" Margaret shook her head. "He said he was passing through, but he doesn't look like someone who's passing anything. He hasn't touched his coffee, just watches, and she," her voice softened, "looks like she's afraid to breathe." Ethan nodded toward Rex, now sitting stiff beneath the booth. "He doesn't usually act like this. He's trained to stay low, rest, but he hasn't taken his eyes off that girl." Margaret followed his gaze, then quietly, "What are you thinking?" Ethan took a slow breath. "In the military, we had hand signals, emergency signals. One of them's a fist, open, fist, 3 times. You teach it to kids in hostage training." Margaret's face paled. "You're saying—" "I don't know, but I know what I saw." Outside, the wind had picked up, and the diner windows began to rattle. A soft alarm beeped from behind the counter. Margaret checked a monitor above the microwave. It showed the weather alert. "Snow's coming down harder," she muttered. "They're saying the interstate might close. Visibility's dropping." Another gust of wind blew through the seams of the diner. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Ethan's fingers drummed the counter. Cole stood up from his booth slowly and adjusted his coat. Lily followed, her head down. He didn't touch her, but his presence moved around her like a shadow. Ethan stepped aside just as they passed. Rex rose too, alert but silent. Ethan's eyes met Lily's for a fraction of a second. And in that moment, the smallest shift. Not fear, hope. The way a candle might flicker when someone walks by carrying a lighter. Cole nodded to Margaret without smiling. "Restroom?" She pointed. "Back left." He led the girl down the hall. Ethan turned to Margaret. "I'm staying." She didn't argue, just poured him another cup. Outside, the snow buried the last tire tracks on the road. Inside, Rex didn't lie down, and Ethan couldn't look away. He'd seen this before, but never this close, never when he could do something. Cole Madden emerged from the hallway with Lily beside him, one hand wrapped loosely but firmly around the small wrist of the girl in the pink dress. The diner lights bounced off his polished black shoes and the smooth wool of his coat. His sharp, pale face betrayed no emotion. Lily's head hung low, her steps barely touching the tile floor. She looked more like a puppet being guided than a child walking on her own. Ethan was already moving. He rose from the booth, his bootsteps slow but certain, and stepped in front of the door before Cole reached it. Snow howled outside the windows, but inside the diner, the air turned still. Every eye followed the scene unfolding near the entrance. The teenage boy in the hoodie, sitting at the far booth near the jukebox, discreetly raised his phone. The red light blinked silently. He wasn't sure what he was recording, but something in the dog's tension and the girl's quiet fear told him this was not ordinary. Ethan's stance was relaxed, but his eyes were locked on Cole. "Evening," he said, his voice calm. Cole stopped a few steps from the exit. "We're leaving," he said coolly, his free hand adjusting his collar. His grip on Lily didn't tighten, but it didn't loosen either. "I don't think she wants to," Ethan replied, "and I think you should wait." Cole gave a tight smile. "You don't know what you're talking about." Ethan didn't move, but Rex did. The old German shepherd had been silent until now, curled under the table, alert, but contained. But when Cole stepped closer to Ethan, Rex surged forward from beneath the booth like a bolt of instinct, his nails scratching briefly against the tile. He positioned himself in front of Lily, between her and Cole's leg, teeth bared just enough to gleam. Then he growled, not a bark, not a warning, a sound that came from deep inside his chest, vibrating through the room like a low drum beat. He didn't lunge. He didn't need to. Cole stopped. Lily's eyes lifted. She stared at Rex as if seeing something sacred. She didn't speak, but her hand crept slowly away from Cole's grip and fell to her side. Rex didn't blink. His eyes were fixed on Cole's gloved hand, the one that had held the girl. His ears were sharp and forward, his tail low but steady, his body rigid with purpose. "Control your dog," Cole hissed. Ethan didn't flinch. He's not reacting to me. He's reacting to you. The room felt frozen. Forks hovered over plates, breath held, steam from coffee drifting in place. Behind the counter, Margaret reached for the landline phone without looking. Her fingers moved with a lifetime of practiced quiet. She stepped into the back room under the pretense of checking inventory. Her voice was low, sharp, quick. "Rachel, it's Margaret. Get here now. Something's wrong." Meanwhile, Ethan reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his phone, and pressed a quick sequence. His other hand stayed loose at his side. He didn't need to threaten anyone. Rex was doing all the talking. Cole's eyes flicked around the diner, calculating. His sharp jaw tightened. "This is ridiculous. She's my niece. She's tired." "She gave a distress signal," Ethan said flatly. "We saw it." "That's absurd. She did it right in front of you, and Rex has been tracking her body language since you walked in. That dog's trained for war. He smells panic, fear, lies." For a moment, no one said anything. Then the boy in the hoodie whispered, "It's still recording," to himself. The phone in his hand caught Rex's every shift, the low rumble, Lily's eyes, Cole's pale face tightening. Cole looked down at Lily, then at Rex. He stepped back, ever so slightly. But Rex stepped forward again, growling louder now. "Back off your dog," Cole said through clenched teeth. "You're free to sit back down," Ethan said calmly, "until the sheriff arrives." Cole's eyes narrowed. "And if I don't?" Ethan didn't answer, but Rex's growl grew into a sound that filled the entire diner. Cole breathed through his nose, lips thin. Slowly he released Lily's wrist. Her arm fell limp to her side. She didn't move to run. She only stepped back one pace and stood behind Rex. Rex remained a statue, his body coiled like a loaded spring. Lily bent slightly and placed one hand on Rex's back. She didn't cry. She didn't even breathe loudly. She just stood there, anchored by the one creature in the room who hadn't taken his eyes off her since she arrived. Margaret stepped out from the back room with 2 mugs of cocoa, hands steady. "I called Sheriff Rachel," she said to the room. "She'll be here in 5. Cole said nothing. He moved slowly to the side, taking a seat at the booth near the window, his eyes never leaving Rex. Ethan didn't sit. He stood near the door, phone in hand, his eyes scanning, muscles ready. Rex took position between Lily and Cole, never turning his back. The teen boy at the far booth hit stop on his video and slipped the phone into his jacket. He'd seen enough to know this wasn't just another winter diner story. Snow continued to fall outside, thick and relentless, but no one inside noticed the cold anymore. They were all watching the dog. The snowfall had thickened, coating the diner's windows in a soft blur, muting the outside world into white silence. Inside, tension clung to every breath. Cole sat rigid in the booth by the window, his back straight, black coat untouched by snow, hands folded too neatly on the table. Lily sat across from him, her pink dress creased, small hands trembling just under the surface of the table. She hadn't spoken. Not once. Rex lay at the edge of the table, close enough to see both of them. His breathing was shallow, his ears perfectly still, but his gaze never wavered. It was locked onto Cole's hands, watching, waiting. Margaret walked behind the counter like a shadow, topping off mugs that no one touched. Glenn leaned in the kitchen doorway with arms crossed, keeping quiet watch. Ethan stood near the entrance, one hand still loosely holding his phone, though the call had ended minutes ago. The door chimed. Sheriff Rachel Carter entered, brushing snow from her padded jacket. She was in her late 30s, lean, athletic, with weathered cheeks and blonde hair pulled into a tight braid. Her boots left small puddles on the floor as she approached. Behind her was Deputy Alvin Glass, stockier, early 50s, clean-shaven and quiet, with a square jaw that barely moved when he nodded toward Ethan. Rachel didn't raise her voice. She simply said, "Cole Madden?" Cole rose slowly, smoothing his coat. "Yes, officer?" "I'm going to need you to come with us. There's a situation that needs clearing up." "I haven't done anything wrong." "That's for us to determine." Lily's eyes flicked to Rachel, then back down. Her feet began to move under the table, and then everything broke. Cole yanked Lily by the wrist, standing so suddenly that the chair skidded backward. The force of it sent Lily stumbling toward the door, her boots slipping on the wet tile. Cole moved fast. too fast for someone who had claimed to be calm. But Rex was faster. The German Shepherd exploded forward, nails scraping against the floor, body low and coiled like a missile. He lunged between Cole and the door, placing himself in the man's path. With a roar that shook the windows, Rex bared his teeth and barked, loud, guttural, and unrelenting. Lily screamed, not out of fear of the dog, but from the sudden movement, the panic. She twisted in Cole's grasp. Ethan moved next, shoving forward through the chaos. He reached Lily in 2 strides and locked his hand around her free arm, pulling her away. She fell against his side, sobbing quietly now, gripping his coat like a life raft. Rachel had already drawn her weapon. "Step away from the child." Cole hesitated, but only for a moment. Then, seeing the muzzle of Rachel's sidearm aimed directly at him, he lifted both hands. Deputy Glass moved in and cuffed him, expression unreadable. "You have the right to remain silent," he began. The diner had gone still again, but this time the silence was thick with relief. Margaret exhaled audibly from behind the counter. Rex didn't move from the door, still snarling low, until Lily reached out with one hand and touched his back. "Rex," Ethan said quietly, and the dog stopped. Rachel holstered her weapon. "You all right?" she asked Lily, but didn't expect an answer. Lily didn't speak. She just reached into the small pocket of her dress and pulled out a small red candy wrapped in foil. She stared at it for a moment, then gently placed it in Ethan's hand. He looked down at it like it was a medal. Rex backed away, taking his place between Ethan and the door. One final barrier, one last line drawn in instinct. Rachel watched the dog for a long moment, then turned to Ethan. She lowered her voice. "Your dog. He knew something was wrong the second you walked in, didn't he?" Ethan didn't smile. "He always knows." Rachel nodded. "I've seen a lot of animals in this job. Never seen one look that human." Ethan looked down at Rex. The dog's eyes were steady, but there was something behind them. Something old, something tired, and something that never once turned away. Outside, the snow had grown into a blizzard. The patrol car lights flashed red and blue against the falling flakes as Cole was led into the back seat, his head ducked low. Rachel remained behind for a few moments, collecting statements, giving quiet instructions. Lily sat next to Ethan in the booth now, nursing a cocoa that Margaret had warmed for the 3rd time. She didn't say a word. She just watched Rex, and every so often reached down to touch the fur behind his ears. And Rex? He sat with his back to the door, facing the girl, guarding her still, even though the danger had gone. Ethan rested his arm on the table, fingers closing around the little red candy. His knuckles were scarred, the kind that told old stories. He thought of Mike then. Mike's last moment on the field, when that blast tore through the sand and the sky. Mike had pushed him away, and Rex had run toward the fire instead of from it. After that, Rex wouldn't leave his side. Not in the hospital. Not during the quiet nights when everything else in the world had stopped making sense. He looked at Rex now, still here, still listening, still willing to throw himself between the innocent and the storm. And somehow, in this cold little diner with its fogged windows and silent booths, Ethan understood something. He hadn't saved the girl. Rex had saved them both. The station walls buzzed faintly from an old fluorescent light overhead. It was late, past midnight, but the world outside remained blanketed in white silence. Snow clung stubbornly to the narrow windows, blurring the view of empty streets and the lonely squad car still idling outside. Ethan sat alone on a hard bench in the corner of the precinct's waiting room, his posture slumped, one foot tapping absently on the linoleum floor. In his hand was a folded letter, the corners worn soft. His thumb traced along the edges again and again, but he didn't open it this time. He knew every word by heart. It wasn't a letter meant for anyone alive. "Mike, I still hear your voice when it's quiet. I still see your face when I blink. You died saving me, and I came home like a ghost. I'm tired, brother. Tired of pretending I'm okay. If you're watching, I'm sorry." The paper trembled slightly in his grip, and he tucked it back into his coat. At his feet lay Rex, curled neatly like a shadow. The German Shepherd had aged, 8 years old now, the tip of his muzzle white, his eyes deep with memory. He hadn't moved much since they arrived, but his ears twitched every time the door opened. Still, his eyes never left the little girl across the room. Lily sat wrapped in a beige wool blanket, knees drawn to her chest, head tilted against the cool cinder block wall. Her face, round and still smudged with dirt, remained expressionless. Her eyes looked through things, not at them. But one arm, tiny, pale, reached behind her to rest gently on the thick fur of Rex's back. He hadn't left her side. Every time Ethan had shifted, Rex had stayed, watching. And Ethan noticed something strange. The moment Lily had walked into the station, she hadn't clung to her mother. She hadn't cried. She hadn't spoken. But the moment she saw Rex, something had softened in her expression. Without hesitation, she had walked straight to him and sat down beside him. As if she'd known him for years. Across the room, the outer doors opened. Cold wind rushed in, followed by hurried footsteps. Grace stepped in, escorted by Sheriff Rachel. She was small, barely past 30, with long brown hair tied hastily at the nape of her neck. Her face was drawn and pale, lips chapped from the wind. Her eyes scanned the room with frantic precision until they landed on the child. "Lily," she breathed. The little girl didn't move. Grace hesitated, then knelt slowly, arms outstretched. "It's me, baby. Mommy's here." Still nothing. But Rex shifted. He moved his head slightly, turning toward Grace, then back toward Lily, waiting, assessing. It was Lily who moved next, but not toward her mother. She leaned sideways and gently rested her cheek against Rex's shoulder. Her hand reached up and disappeared under the dog's collar. When it emerged, she was holding a dull silver rectangle on a short chain. The dog tag. Ethan tensed. He hadn't realized she'd found it. Rex always wore it, Mike's dog tag, tucked beneath his collar, hidden but ever present. Lily looked at it for a moment, then closed her small hand around it and leaned into the dog even more, pressing her face into the warm fur. Grace began to cry silently, but didn't move closer. Sheriff Rachel stepped forward and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "She's safe," Rachel whispered. "Give her time." Ethan finally stood. He approached slowly, crouched beside Rex, and spoke quietly. "That tag belonged to a soldier," he said. "A good man. He gave his life for someone else." Lily didn't look up, but she relaxed just slightly. Rex, without prompting, turned his head and gently licked the girl's small hand. It was the first response she'd had all night. A tiny breath escaped her lips, and then, like a break in thick clouds, something remarkable happened. Lily smiled, just a twitch at first, one corner of her mouth rising. Then both. It wasn't wide, it wasn't loud, but it was real, and Ethan saw it. He felt the shift inside him like a lock releasing. Mike's tag, Rex's loyalty, Lily's smile. The letter in his coat no longer felt so urgent. Not tonight. He looked at Rex, who simply blinked up at him, ears flicking forward, gaze steady. And in that moment, Ethan knew that some rescues happened loud, with sirens and shouting, but others, like this one, were quiet, soft, unmistakable, and led by the eyes of a dog who had never once stopped watching. The courthouse stood tall against a gray sky, its limestone facade streaked with decades of weather. It was a cold morning, the kind that numbed fingertips and stiffened collars, but the small crowd that had gathered outside didn't seem to care. Most were local, small-town residents drawn by rumor, concern, and the growing weight of a story they barely understood. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with restrained tension. Wooden benches creaked beneath heavy winter coats. The air smelled faintly of coffee and dust. At the front, a simple state seal hung behind the judge's bench, a symbol of order, though even that seemed fragile today. Grace sat at the witness stand, upright but pale. Her brown eyes were rimmed red, her hands trembling only when she wasn't gripping the edge of the table. She wore a charcoal gray sweater and black slacks, her hair tied back neatly as if control over the small things might anchor her through the larger storm. The prosecutor, Naomi Tiller, stood before her, calm, composed, in a tailored navy suit and low heels that clicked softly across the wooden floor. Her voice was steady. "Miss Thomas, please tell the court, in your own words, what happened the day your daughter disappeared?" Grace glanced at Lily, who sat in the front row beside Ethan and Sheriff Rachel. The girl wore a clean pink dress and white tights. Her hair had been brushed and loosely braided, but her face remained still, her eyes half shielded by the presence of Rex, who sat at her feet like a living statue. The dog hadn't moved much, except to shift closer to Lily's legs whenever someone raised their voice. Grace took a shaky breath. "He said he just wanted to visit her," she began. "Said he missed her. I didn't know he'd taken her until she didn't come back." "Who is he?" Naomi prompted. "Cole Weaver, my ex, Lily's biological father." Grace's voice trembled now. "He wasn't supposed to have custody. He never wanted it when she was born. But something changed. He showed up again suddenly, and when I said no, he took her." "Did he threaten you?" "Not directly. He didn't need to. He just stared." Her hands tightened. "Like he had already decided. Like I didn't matter." Naomi gave her a moment, then she turned to the judge. "Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to enter into evidence a drawing found in the possession of the minor, Lily Thomas." The judge, a grizzled man with a bald crown and thick gray eyebrows, nodded. "Admitted." An officer brought forward a plastic folder containing a single sheet of paper. It was a crayon drawing done on cheap sketch paper. There were only 3 figures, one tall and looming with dark scribbles where a face should be, clearly Cole, pulling a smaller stick figure with yellow hair and tears drawn in blue. Behind them, drawn in thick lines of green and brown, stood a man with wide shoulders offering a round red circle, a candy. His jacket, shaded in green, looked like a uniform. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Naomi faced the jury. Lily doesn't write yet, but she remembers, and she told her story here, in the way children often do when words are too hard. The defense attorney, a slick-haired man in his 40s named Kevin Morrow, rose. His navy suit was pristine, his tie a sharp contrast of crimson. "Objection, Your Honor. This is emotional manipulation. It's crayon art, not evidence." The judge eyed him. "Noted, but it's already entered. Continue, Miss Tiller." Naomi turned to her next witness. "We'd now like to call Mr. Ethan Cole to the stand." Ethan rose, shoulders squared but face unreadable. He wore a plain dark coat over his shirt, the same green jacket he'd worn when it all began. His boots thudded lightly against the wood as he stepped up and took his oath. Naomi approached slowly. "Mr. Cole, can you tell us what happened the moment you walked into the diner that night?" Ethan nodded. "I saw a man and a girl sitting together. Something about it didn't sit right. The girl was quiet, still. The man kept glancing around. My dog, Rex, he's trained, retired military K9. He wouldn't settle, just stared at the girl." "Did anything else happen?" Ethan hesitated, then turned slightly toward the jury. She raised her hand, made a fist, opened it. 3 times. "Can you explain what that means?" "It's an SOS signal, one we use in the military when we can't speak. It's rare for a kid to know it, but it's unmistakable." A quiet tension crept through the room. Ethan's voice stayed calm. Then Cole tried to leave with her. I stood up to stop him, but Rex was the one who really stopped it. He growled hard, stood between them, wouldn't move. Naomi nodded. "There was also a video posted to social media?" "Yes, a teenager in the diner filmed it. It went viral. The video caught the signal, Rex's reaction, and Cole pulling her arm." Naomi turned toward the gallery. "That video, plus Mr. Cole's prior records, paint a disturbing picture." She clicked a remote. On screen appeared a police file, partially redacted, but clearly showing prior charges of domestic abuse and investigations into missing person contacts. Cole Weaver has been on multiple watch lists. No convictions, but enough smoke to warrant fire. Lily may not be the only child. Kevin Morrow stood again. "This is circumstantial." But the judge banged his gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Morrow." Naomi walked slowly back to the jury box. This case isn't just about one night. It's about what happens when someone listens. When a child whispers in fear and someone hears. Not just a soldier, a dog, Rex. She gestured to the front row. Justice doesn't always begin with words. Sometimes it begins with a look, a hand gesture, a growl. She rested her hand briefly on the rail. "Let's make sure it ends with truth." By day's end, the ruling was clear. Cole Weaver was remanded without bail, pending further investigation into child trafficking. Charges would follow. And the courtroom, though somber, felt lighter, as if a storm had passed. Outside, the snow had stopped. Ethan stepped into the cold with Rachel and Grace beside him. Lily walked ahead with Rex, one hand on his back, the other holding a red candy. The snow had softened into a quiet hush, blanketing the world in stillness. The park, a small stretch of green nestled between silent apartment blocks and sleeping maple trees, felt suspended in time. Wind rattled through bare branches, but the sun had broken through for the first time in days, casting golden veins across the icy pond. Ethan sat alone on a weathered bench facing the water, the collar of his olive coat turned up, his gloved hands clasped between his knees, the same dark green coat he wore on his worst nights, the coat he would have died in. His face was unshaven, jaw angular and taut, a week's worth of stubble lining the edge, eyes tired but less haunted, more present. Beside him, Rex lay curled in the snow, chest rising and falling with the deep breath of a dog at peace, but never asleep. His ears twitched occasionally, and his golden brown eyes, streaked with gray now, stayed half open, scanning gently. The old German shepherd was showing his years, his gait slower, his back legs stiff in the morning. But here, in the cold sun beside Ethan, he looked almost young again. Across the park, small footsteps crunched through the snow. Lily. She came slowly, bundled in a pink coat 2 sizes too large and snow boots that squeaked with each step. Her small gloved hands were stuffed into her pockets. She didn't wave, didn't call out. Ethan didn't move, but his head turned as she approached. She didn't speak, only sat beside him, boots swinging inches above the icy path, back straight and brave. She reached into her coat. From her mitten, she offered something small and red. A candy, round, wrapped in crinkled plastic. Another red candy. She placed it gently into Ethan's palm, then folded his fingers over it. No words. But it was enough. He looked at her, really looked at her, and in her wide eyes was something rare. Trust. Not just in him, in the moment, in the silence. The kind of trust that didn't need language, the kind you gave to dogs, to ghosts, to people who'd stood in the fire and didn't run. He glanced down at Rex, who had now sat upright, tail thumping once, lightly. The 3 of them sat in silence, 3 souls by a frozen pond. Asterisk, asterisk. Weeks ago, Ethan had sat on this same bench, but alone. It was the last place Mike had taken him before deployment. Mike had laughed back then, big and loud, with his crooked front tooth and that gravel voice that could calm storms. He'd promised they'd be back here again. Promised Rex would chase ducks across the frozen pond and knock over kids with his tail. But Mike had come home in a box, and Rex had come home broken. The flashbacks were worse in the cold. One night, not long after his return, Ethan had stood on the edge of the bridge outside town. The wind howled like artillery through the trees. Below him, the river was iced over, black and unforgiving. He had the letter, the same one still folded in his coat. He had the weight of 1,000 what-ifs clawing at his chest. But as he stepped forward, Rex barked, not just once, a sound that split through the dark like a bullet. The bark became a growl, low, desperate, angry, and then Ethan turned and saw him. Rex, refusing to stay in the truck, having broken through the back gate, paws bleeding from the ice, eyes wild. And Ethan had fallen to his knees, and Rex had curled around him like a living barrier. After that, Rex refused to eat for 3 days, laid beside Ethan's bed and watched him breathe like he didn't trust him to keep going. Another time in a VA office, a bureaucrat in uniform had questioned Ethan's PTSD file, accused him of exaggerating symptoms. Rex had growled again, low and thunderous, enough that the man backed out of the room without another word. That day, Ethan realized Rex hadn't just carried memories of war, he carried Mike too. Sometimes, Ethan would catch the way Rex watched him, that tilt of the head, that stillness, like Mike was still speaking through the dog's eyes. It had kept him alive. Asterisk, asterisk. Now, here by the pond, Lily leaned her head gently against Ethan's arm. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Rex stood and walked forward, pressing his head between them both. Lily giggled, quietly, and wrapped her arms around his neck. Ethan felt a knot loosen in his chest. Sheriff Rachel had told him not to expect much. "She'll come around in her own time," she'd said. "Kids like her, they learn to breathe again before they learn to talk." But Lily was breathing just fine now, in slow, easy rhythm. He looked down at the red candy still in his hand. She had only given it to 2 people, him and Rex. And Ethan understood now. It wasn't just candy. It was her signal, her own way of saying, "I'm safe." The wind picked up slightly, brushing snow off the tree branches in a soft shimmer. Ethan watched it fall around them, silent and silver. He reached into his coat, took out the old letter, stared at it for a long moment, then tore it in half. Then again, and let the pieces fall into the pond like ashes. Rex barked once, softly. Lily looked up. Ethan smiled. He didn't need saving anymore. He had already been saved, by a whisper, by a child, by a dog who never left. The snow had melted into memory. Where once the pond lay frozen and the trees bare, now soft buds bloomed along slender branches, and children's laughter echoed across the small park outside town. Spring had arrived, hesitant at first, but now undeniable. Red Flame Shelter stood at the edge of that park like a promise fulfilled. It wasn't grand, not by any means. A repurposed community center with new siding, fresh paint, and windows that gleamed like eyes ready to welcome stories. The name hung on a hand-carved wooden sign above the entrance, letters painted in deep red. Below the name, in smaller print, "Hope has teeth too." Inside, the air smelled of clean floors, crayons, and something sweet baking in the back. The main room buzzed with activity. Kids, some loud, some quiet, some holding invisible fears in their fists, were drawing, stacking blocks, or reading in little nooks. The walls were lined with their art. Nearly all of them had included one recurring figure, a large German shepherd, always sitting by the door, always watching, always smiling in the way dogs do, with their whole body. Asterisk, asterisk. Rex sat precisely where he belonged, just to the right of the entrance, between a potted ficus and a cubby of children's boots. His ears perked forward. He was 10 now, gray at the muzzle, slower in the knees, but none of the kids minded. To them, he was a knight, a guardian, a furry therapist with unspoken wisdom. Someone had hung a laminated sign around his neck. It read, K9, officer, retired but still on duty. He didn't move much. He didn't have to. The children came to him, some for pets, some to whisper secrets, some just to sit beside him and feel the quiet he carried in his chest. Rex understood them, perhaps too well. Asterisk, asterisk. Ethan walked the perimeter of the room slowly, clipboard in hand. He wore a black windbreaker over his usual green shirt. Slacks this time instead of jeans. The faint lines around his eyes had softened. He looked like a man who had made peace with the weight he'd carried and decided to carry something new. He was now officially the shelter's security and trauma response advisor. But unofficially, he was the one the kids ran to when the world felt too loud. The one who knew how to sit in silence without asking questions. The one who watched the door with Rex, not to keep danger out, but to make sure no one felt left behind. He turned as he heard a pair of light footsteps. Lily, 5 years old. Her hair had grown longer now, pulled back into a messy braid. She wore a red hoodie over her favorite pink dress. The candy-colored necklace she never took off swung as she walked. She no longer shuffled or looked over her shoulder. She moved like someone who knew the floor wouldn't vanish. She ran straight to Rex. Rex lifted his head. She held out her hand, and in it, another red candy. Their ritual. Ethan smiled as he watched her place the candy gently in Rex's bowl. She whispered something into his ear, only Rex would ever know what, and then wrapped her arms around his neck. A few feet away stood Grace, Lily's mother. Grace was in her early 30s, tall and lean, with short auburn hair and tired green eyes. She had the look of someone who hadn't slept well in years, but was learning to again. Her coat was thrifted, her shoes scuffed, but her hands were steady. She watched Lily with a gratitude too deep for words. Ethan joined her side. "She sleeps better now," Grace said softly. "She smiles more," Ethan replied. They didn't say much more. Some silences are sacred. Asterisk, asterisk. Across the room, Margaret adjusted a tray of cookies near the volunteer desk. The woman had swapped her apron for a cardigan, her lipstick for a warm smile. Her silver hair was pulled into a loose bun, and her eyes held the sharpness of someone who saw more than she ever said. Sheriff Rachel stood beside her, hands on her belt, in full uniform. "She's come a long way," Rachel said, nodding toward Lily. Margaret chuckled. "We all have." Then, quieter, "But it started with him. She nodded toward Rex. Rachel followed her gaze. I still think about that day, she said, how everything in that diner froze, not because of the man, but because of the dog. Margaret's voice was almost a whisper. If I hadn't seen the way he stood there, between that man and the girl, I might have second-guessed everything, might have let her walk out with him. Rachel nodded slowly. There are things only dogs can see, things too quiet for us. Fear, courage, truth. Margaret added, and they don't need words to call it out. They both fell silent as a group of kids ran by, laughing. Asterisk, asterisk. Outside, the sun dipped lower, painting long shadows on the lawn. Ethan stepped to the doorway and leaned against the frame. Rex padded over beside him and sat. They watched as Lily stepped out onto the grass. She turned, waiting. Ethan walked down to her. She took his hand. Rex followed. The three of them moved slowly through the yard, past the garden beds waiting for spring planting, past the small wooden sign that read Quiet Time Corner, to the tall gate at the far end. A child had painted on the gate, a mural of a dog with wings guarding the threshold. Ethan looked down at Lily. She looked up, smiled, and squeezed his hand. He looked at Rex, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man carrying loss. He felt like someone standing at a beginning. Asterisk, asterisk. The gate clicked behind them. Rex sat at the post, watching, as if to say, no child walks alone again, not on his watch, not anymore. Sometimes God doesn't send angels with wings. He sends an old dog with tired eyes. He sends a soldier with a broken past. He sends a child who doesn't speak, but still knows how to say, help me. And in the quiet moments, when the world isn't watching, that's when miracles unfold. If you believe that love can heal, if you've ever felt a whisper in your heart and called it faith, then share this story. Leave a comment below for those who are still searching for their own Rex. Subscribe to our channel for more stories where hope walks on four paws. And tonight, before you sleep, say a little prayer for the lost, the lonely, and the ones who still wait at the gate. May God bless you, and may you always have someone like Rex, watching, waiting, ready to love you back to life.